everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode on Wagner on ethics and leadership. You already have learned so much about who Dr. Wagner is and his writing. So I'm going to make a quick intro, something that you didn't know about him. Um, we know Dr. Wagner is a full time professor at the University of Houston Clear Lake with College of Education. But along with that, Dr. Wagner Dr. Wagner also holds degrees in political science and economics. He has often times in his life have been involved in political matters of the state, of the city, and at national level. For example, he was asked by President Bush, the senior 41, to go for a 3 mile run to discuss matters. And then also when Houston had the first NAFTA conference between the US, Mexico, and Canada, Dr. Wagner was on the committee that set up the mechanics for this very important conference. And he was given specific tasks um, uh, related to making sure that the guests arrived and the logistics that followed. Also, he, even though Dr. Wagner never put his name in the hat for political position, he loves his country very much, and you can tell that by his service in the army. And today, I would ask Dr. Wagner to please give us a little more insight about the military and his experience there. Um, Dr. Wagner was involved in programs such as Draft. He wrote articles, and today we're going to discuss the topics from that article that was published in the newspaper in I think it's the Austin American Statesman a few years back, experiencing or explaining why draft is needed. So, Dr. Wagner, welcome. And I'm sorry if I didn't do justice in introducing you the Army way. I'm not really sure what the correct way of saying these, what the correct
Yep,
terms are to use.
just
So if you
fine.
can please correct me and explain to me or to the audience um, what was the relationship between you and President Bush? Like what was that about, the 3 mile run? And then something about the governor of Missouri that you had mentioned. If you could please elaborate little, and then I'll start with my questions.
All right. Well, both of those are really kind of sidebars. I had gotten to know President Bush 41 through a number of just passing um, engagements at a variety of different functions. And one day he asked me if I wanted to go for a run. It was a 3 mile run at a park in Houston called Memorial Park, and we can talk. And so we did. And it was interesting to have a couple of big Secret Service men in front of you running, and two more big Secret Service guys behind you running as you're running with the president. And he was ex-president at the time. He was a former president. And then a large Suburban with all the windows darkened, just driving along the road just shortly behind us. It was rather daunting. With regards to Missouri, that was such a long time ago. When coming out of college, the governor of Missouri, Warren Hearns, uh, wanted me to consider going into politics. He thought I'd make a decent politician, and I went to law school on a scholarship in the University of Missouri. Initially, this was back during the 70s, and a lot was going on. And I was sure I was going to get drafted. I did get a low number. Fortunately, with help from both Governor Hearns and also a congressman from Chicago by the name of Rastenkowski, who was head of Ways and Means in the Congress. They helped helped me get into the reserves quickly. That was in the Army Security Agency, and then get in for active duty. When I came out, I went back to college, demonstrations everywhere about a number of things. I had a lot to think about. And so while I already had degrees in political science and economics, I had to think, do I want to go to law school, finish up law school? Do I want to I want to study philosophy of all things? And I had more questions than answers in life at that time. And so I took a couple of courses out of each one of them, and decided that I had a lot of answers I needed to search for, and that the way to search for them was going to be through philosophy. And of course, people might have said, well, that was such a strange idea. Well, if you were growing up in the 70s, there were plenty of strange ideas that animated many of us in our careers and our relations with others. So there you go on, how I found my way into the military and out. And now I think you have some questions about that.
Yes, I do. And this is one of the favorite subject of mine, the military or the armed forces. So you're speaking my love language right here. Um, did you mean we need it for the drafting? Did you mean that we need it for the military reason? The
Well,
draft, the article that
yeah,
you wrote.
of course you need to have a draft for military. In the military, it's one of the confusions of the 70s. People thought the military did one thing, and that was be aggressive toward some nation that we were not friendly with. And that's not the sole function of the military. Anytime there's really a serious national disaster, I mean, if there were ever a serious volcano that were to take place, such as up at Yellowstone, we know that's going to happen. There are going to be thousands of people that will be injured. There will be a need to remove people miles and miles away from a vast area in a short time. There's no way that any civilian authority can pull that sort of thing off. But the military can, both because of the number of people it has in it, all the resources it has, and it's an extraordinary organization. All of your branches of military serve us far more than just going to war. And by the way, if somebody wants to do harm to us, we do need soldiers who go to war. And we can't just rely on the professional soldiers as we have in our Army today or our Navy. The professional soldiers and sailors and so on are first rate. They really are. They're good people. And so you need them, but they'll be there whether you have a draft or not. The draft also requires a lot of other people to make up the numbers for the size of the military that you need. And also the draft does something special for the people that go through basic training and go through military training in general. So for military reasons, we need a draft, as I wrote in that article in the Austin American Statesman. But there is so much more that the draft does for the nation.
So you seem to suggest that we need it for collective community reasons. Is that in line with what you were saying?
Absolutely. When I can remember back in my own going through basic training, had guys in my barracks who were from Detroit, from the hills of Tennessee. They were from all over the country. And it was interesting. There was one fellow from Tennessee who didn't like the type of fellows he thought were in our barracks from Detroit. And it was a racial thing. I was what was called a platoon guy. That means kind of like a pretend sergeant. When the sergeant's not around, even though I was one of the troops, I was supposed to help people stay in line. Well, the two got in a fight. And the guy from, Detroit really did the fellow from Tennessee in, and the fellow from Tennessee deserved it. But then when the fight was over with, the fellow from Detroit did one more thing he didn't need to do, and it broke the leg of the fellow from Tennessee. And that was my responsibility, as the drill sergeants were uh, uh, made a note of when everything fell out, that I should have made sure that didn't happen. You learn things. And as I said, that people came from all over, and you learn, for instance, that you just can't hang around with your boys from back home. In the Army, you've got to hang around with all the guys that you're enlisted with. You depend on one another. That's what being together in a military organization means. One for all and all for one. So and there's a lot of important equipment that needs to be learned how to use and so on. A fellow I know went in the Army. This was back in the 50s, and they were just starting to develop computers. And this fellow, who never had finished college, was set aside to learn some stuff about computers. He got out of the Army just a couple of years later and went into computer work and became a millionaire, thanks to what he learned in the Army. It's the military is in so many ways, the backbone of our country, not just militarily, but in so many ways socially.
You mentioned in the writing that there would be an educational value to reinstating the draft. What are they?
Well, one of the things that virtually everyone that I know would say of our schools today, at every level, from kindergarten through college, is that there are certain things that are missing. For example, our students don't seem to be learning much self-discipline. They are agitated when called upon to be dependable, to be reliable, to hold up their end of something. In the Army, you don't have those options. In the Navy, you don't have those options. In the Air Force, you don't have those options. In the Coast Guard, you don't have those options. You will learn to hold up your end. You will learn self-discipline. You will learn self-discipline from working with others. For example, the Army, as just one example, has you do a lot of close order drill. And in the 70s, young people such as myself would make fun of that. Close order drill is when you're given orders to march, perhaps double time, halt, left face, right face, forward, march. And it's amazing to see how many people literally have trouble learning that initially, but they do learn it. And the platoon, the company, even a battalion, they must learn how to march together. As simple of a thing as learning how to march together, how to come to attention, how to go to at ease and return to attention when called upon to do so. Makes you conscientious of the fellow to your left, the fellow to your right, in front of you and behind you, and what it takes to do your part to hold it all together. The military, of somebody in a squad or up to a company steps out of line, the whole company or the squad may be penalized in some way. And in our schools, we're afraid to do that sort of thing because we think, oh, somebody's going to sue if we do. Or people will complain because, their kid didn't do whatever it is that the group is being penalized for. In the Army, in the Navy, Marine Corps, in all of them, you're learning that you're part of a unit. And it's not just you. I can give you a personal example on that. That makes fun of me, but it's one of the times in life where I'm really glad I was made fun of, because I learned a lot from it. It was just a couple of days before I was about to muster out. And so for me, my military duty was over with, and I'm about to go home. There's nothing. Day after tomorrow, I'm going to be on a bus going back to home from Fort Knox, Kentucky. And I talk in formation. You don't talk in formation. And this skinny little sergeant that was up in front of the platoon yelled, "Who's that talking in my formation?" And he came walking around and everybody froze. And he comes walking up to me, standing tall. He comes up to about my nose and he said, "Wagner, were you talking in my formation?" And I said, "Yes, Sergeant." And he said, "What gave you the right to talk in my formation?" And I said, "I'm sorry, Sergeant." "Don't tell me you're Sergeant. You're sorry. You don't talk in formation. Do you understand that?" "Yes, Sergeant." "How long have you been here?" And I would tell him. "You haven't learned yet? You don't talk in formation?" "Yes, Sergeant." And he said, "What's that say over your pocket?" And I said, "Wagner." And he said, "No, stupid, the other pocket." And I said, "U.S. Army." And he said, "That's right. And until you're mustered out of here, you're a part of the U.S. Army. And at this moment, I'm the one that's in charge. Do you understand that?" "Yes, Sergeant." I really kind of enjoyed this fellow who I got to know some bits about him along the way. And he never went to college. So I really enjoyed being told by this fellow, "No, stupid." It was the other pocket. Because it was if we said that to a student today, they would go, "Oh my gosh, I'm being humiliated." It was a way to shape you up. One of the things that the basic training does in all the services, it tells you that you're not all that. You're not all that.
Mhm.
And uh, there was another fellow that went through training with me. He was a small fellow. He was Jewish. He was in his third year of law school, and it seemed like a couple of sergeants, the drill sergeants, picked on him. And then on day as that we were graduating from basic training, there was a big commotion because we had a two-star general showing up for our graduation. So the sergeants are panicking, the lieutenants and the captains, they want everything to go just perfectly. We had to be on our best behavior. Turns out the two-star general, that all the fuss was being changed to accommodate this fellow, was the father of this little Jewish recruit. And when the sergeants found that out, they were like, "Oh, we didn't mean to be picking on you or whatever." And he said, "Don't worry about it. I'm here like anybody else, just to become another soldier. Um, uh, you don't worry about it." And I talked with him afterwards when the whole graduation was over with, and I said, "Why didn't you ever say anything to anybody?" And he said, "Because my dad told me one of the reasons I'm in here is because I've got to learn to be humble. And whether I go on in life to become a lawyer that's successful or not, I won't be a successful person if I haven't learned something about humility and being humble." So, uh,
Wow.
and being there for the next guy. That's part of what the military teaches you. In our schools, at any level, no longer teach that.
And that's sad.
Yeah, that is.
Dr. Wagner, I'm going to share something personal. When I was in high school, one of my friend and I, we went to the Army recruiting office. We wanted to sign up. I was so excited to join. I wanted to join. But we were told we were 17. We have to wait until we're 18 years old. We can't do anything until we are at 18. I cried so much that day. I was like, why not me? Why? And my friend was like, it's just one more year. But the whole life changed in that one year. Then I fell in love, and then I was dreaming about getting married, and and then here I am. I never got to the army or the air force. I was more for the air force, but didn't
I
happen.
had I had no interest in being in any aspect of the military. I just didn't have a choice. But I'm always grateful that I went through it. That the choice really didn't exist. Uh, I learned, as did many college graduates that were with me at the time, because we would, talk about the experience. that many of us were more proud of finishing up even basic training than we were of a bachelor's degree, because we had no choice. We had to put more of our heart and soul into it than we did for virtually any class. So.
And then this is the best armed forces in the world. So you have to be proud, like you are part of something big. Anyways, I'm getting
Yeah, I don't, actually, I think they would discourage that. You're in the military not to be proud of being a part of the best military in the world or the biggest military in the world, because the only way you ever find out who's the best arm wrestler is that you sit down and you arm wrestle.
Mhm.
And when it comes to war, that's dangerous. What you really discover is that you're there for one another. You're not in this world just for yourself. A roommate I had in college who had already gone to Vietnam. He was a CB, and he came back and then went to college. And he never talked about the military. And one night, I'm looking on his dresser, and there's a silver star.
Mm.
A bronze star is given for bravery. A silver star is given for holy smokes bravery. And I asked him, what did he get that for? And he made light of it. He didn't want to talk about it. He said, oh, it's just luck that you get those. I didn't think so. And a few weeks later, I forget which country it was. I think might have been North Korea. They had overtaken one of our ships and had taken the crew off of them. And it was a big scandal for international affairs at the time. And my roommate drank about a fifth of some kind of alcohol that night. And then he started crying. And then he told this story. He asked me a question first. He said, what would you do if you were on patrol and you're 2 miles outside of controlled lines, and you've got a platoon, and on top of the hill there's a radio, so the people up there, the officer and the radio control person, can feed information back to the base, and the rest of you are down in foxholes around the hill to protect the radio. And then you hear on the radio, because I used to carry transistor radios with them. They hear on not a military radio, but transistor radio, that the Viet Cong were going to attack their position that night. And so they're amazed. How would the Viet Cong know their position that night? And trying to make this story much shorter, there was an attack, and at the end of the night, there were only 2 people left out of the 30 or 40 that were there. 2 of them were ambulatory, 2 were not ambulatory. And so one of the fellows had to go back. In fact, it was my roommate, had to go back to the base to get help to come out and get the other 2 who were wounded and couldn't walk, and the one who was ambulatory who was there to protect them. And so he had to walk back 2 miles. And then when the helicopters came out, he had to go back out with the helicopters to show them where to land and take the folks out. And I thought there was a lot of bravery in that. And that's why he got the Silver Star. And I said, how did everyone get killed? And he said, well, the battle went on. They attacked at midnight, like they said. And but with sunlight, they retreated. I said, sunlight? They attacked at midnight. When does sunlight come up in Vietnam? And he said, I don't know, 5:30 or whatever. He said, you made it sound like it was a battle that lasted for a few minutes. And he said it was all night long. And I asked him, did you ever kill somebody right in your own foxhole? And he got mad at me. And he said, that's stupid. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you don't ask about those things.
Mm.
And I learned from him. He was proud of having survived the battle. He was proud of the men he served with. And that's what matters to him. And then I learned from a lot of other military folks, particularly those that had seen combat. What you learn is to be proud of the person to your left and to your right, in front and behind. You don't have time for something grand in mind. You have got to be a part of the guys who are around you. That's who you're proud of. That's who you're beholding to. Those are your lifeline to a future. You're their lifeline. And it's that simple. Where do you learn those lessons? I don't think you had to be in combat to learn those, although I'm sure combat makes it indelible. But part of training in the military is to create people who have that kind of humility and sensitivity to one another. One time I was talking to President Bush, Bush 41, and he was shot down during World War II, and an American submarine came to pick him up, and at the same time, a Japanese, essentially a PT boat, was coming to get the American pilot at the same time. Both were racing toward him. The submarine had come to the surface, and sailors had run up on the deck and were shooting the deck gun at the PT boat, which was shooting their guns at the submarine. The submarine got to Bush first and pulled him on board. And if you go to his museum up in College Station, he wrote lots of letters to his wife and to his parents. Never once told him about being shot down. Told him he was in a submarine, told him, the food was great. The guys on the submarine are wonderful guys. No one ever knew at the time about how close he came to being either captured or killed until he got back home. And it was difficult for him to talk about the whole experience because he was the pilot of the plane that went down, and guys that were with him died. He's there he wasn't in that water anymore than John F. Kennedy was for something as grand as the nation. You can't wrap your mind around that. Kennedy was there and helped pull one of his PT fellow men to safety in swimming and pulling the fellow along, not because of any orders he was given, but because that's the men he serves with. And Bush was worried about his family and that they not worry about how close he came to death. And I remember telling Bush that I thought he was brave. And here he was, the former president of the United States, and he blushed. His face was all red, and not from our running. His face was all red and said, "Oh, no, not that." And I said, "What do you mean, not that?" He said, I was no hero. I was just like anybody else doing a job that we had to do. And I said, "Well, with all due respect, Mr. President, rather than disagree with you, I've got to tell you, my generation seems not to think the way folks did in your generation. I wish we did." So, is there educational value to being in basic training? Yeah, if you're not going to, do some really hard-edged training in schools, and we're not. Having people in their young adulthood, as Plato used to say about how you train people for the democracy of Athens. They've got to go through military training, no questions asked. You learn how to follow orders. Before you can ever learn to give orders, you need to learn how to follow orders. And you need to learn how to suppress your wants and desires in order to shoulder the burden of a colleague next to you who is struggling. Simple ideas, face to face, person to person. Yeah, I think we all need that. I think we all need that. I think that's one of the reasons why, so many other countries have a draft. It's rather odd that we don't.
So where would women fit in this? Because you said the draft should include women. And do you still believe that in right today's time?
Right. Well, for some of the same reasons that women who I think have a more of a natural tendency to look out for one another because they have to look out for babies when they give birth and all that. So, they may be primed by nature to be more other regarding right from the get-go. And guys can be more like the Lone Ranger who takes off on his own. And in the military reminds us that you can't take off on your own. You need to serve others. But I think there's more respect to be gained between the two genders when they serve together. I think they can be more sympathetic toward one another when they serve together. And it's something that all people who have gone through a military training can share stories with one another. It is bonding.
So, and then you also mentioned that the government would draft young people for the military needs first, and then other costly social roles as well. Can you explain what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think there should be a draft bringing everyone somewhere in between your 18th birthday and your 30th birthday to bring you into service for 2, 3, 4 years, whatever the requirement might be. Everybody. But they don't all have to go into the military. Even when we did have a draft, they didn't all go into the Army. Some went into the Marines. They didn't all go into the Army and Marines. Some went into the Navy. Some went into the Air Force. Some were drafted into the Air Force. I don't know if anyone was drafted into the Coast Guard, but things got rough enough. They could. And some of the people that might have signed up for the Coast Guard thinking it would be easy duty, they were astonished to learn that many of the Swifty boats that went up and down the Mekong Delta over in Vietnam were driven by Coast Guardsmen. So,
Mhm.
they thought they were going to be roaming around on a boat off of the coast of Miami. That may not have worked out that way for them. But in any case, the country faces a lot of uh, financial problems and uh, work problems besides just military things. So part of what I had in mind said everybody gets drafted between the ages of 18 and 30. And even those with modest disablement, they too, but they would be in a little bit of a separate cast. They will put their 2 years of service in, but as appropriate to their health. Now, for everybody else that is able and fit, everybody will go through a basic training, whether it's with the Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy. They'll go through a basic training because you learn a lot of discipline there that you didn't get anywhere else. You learn humility, the things I talked about before. You lose some weight, you'll get into good shape. Then after basic training is up, after 8 weeks, you will be assigned according to the nation's needs. And so most will be assigned to one of the military areas, whether it's Army, Marines, Navy, Air Force. Most will be assigned to a military branch. But there will be a number of others that will be assigned according to the nation's needs, not according to the individual's wants.
Mhm.
And they can be sorted out on all sorts of things. We spend a lot of money on security at all of our airports, and we need reliable security guards there. Well, the military has just trained uh, people who can then go through appropriate security training for all of our many airports. And a buck private doesn't get paid much, and you shouldn't get paid much. You're living in a wonderful country. And so you're giving 2 years to this country, and you'll do just fine on minimal pay. Don't worry about it. And so the cost of security at airports probably even be increased. Um, and we could have more security than we have right now because we could put more people into it if there was a draft. Um, Our cities have far more crime in them than our police forces are able to manage. And police force training is incredibly expensive. That's another place where they can be assigned to various police forces in major urban areas around the country. And they will go through police training after their military training. They will go through police training, and then they will spend the next, perhaps it'll be a year and a half or whatever, as a police officer in various parts around the country. Some of them, just like some who are drafted, volunteer to stay in the Army afterwards or the Navy. Some of them that go through that training will decide to stay as a police officer. They didn't know all the rewards of being a police officer until they were made to go from basic training into police officer training and then acting as a police officer. Others will, be happy that their 2 years is over with. They'll get out, but they were glad they served. You don't have to tell everybody they serve because everybody will serve. We're all Americans. We will serve, and our country will find some place to help us serve. Firemen, wherever there's a need for greater EMTs and firemen, people coming from basic training who have already gotten some EMT training, that's part of going to basic training, will then go through fire training and will augment the forces of fire protection agencies around the country, forest firefighters. So a year and a half of, fighting forest fires, because that really is a difficult job. And the people doing it are always seem to be undermanned for what they have to deal with. Well, we can take care of that too. And at minimal cost to the public, because you don't pay a buck private much money for serving his country. But he takes whatever experience he's had with him when it's over with to become a better citizen alongside of each of us. And who knows what it might do to help him in his career. And men and women can be doing all those things as well. Hospitals in inner cities, they oftentimes have trouble finding staff, nurses, techs. And once again, you can take people out of basic training, and the government decides, look, we need to send you into this part of this city, and here you're going to be trained as a such and such tech, and you will work there for a year and a half to serve your country. We will have barracks wherever there's a substantial number of service personnel that will need that sort of asset, so that you live communally with those who you serve with for 2 years. You will get weekends off, just like soldiers get weekends off on occasion to go visit others.
But wouldn't someone argue with you that is
Oh, sure.
drafting young people a form of cheap forced labor?
Of course, it's they would argue that it's particularly young people would argue that it's cheap forced labor, and it is. And hopefully, if it works, when it's over, you were glad you did it.
Mm-hmm.
When it's over, it was okay that someone called you stupid for not naming what was over your pocket because he didn't say which pocket. It was still okay because you knew you were at the ground root, what builds the nation. More security guards at schools. Once again, come out of basic training, you can go into some sort of special training to monitor the schools. Security. There's so much that could be done. And these people are only being paid as buck privates. And in the military, you have a system of pay that isn't immediately matched with rank. So you can go from a role of a private up to the salary of, say, a corporal or even a buck sergeant without having that rank. So you could still be getting raises every so many months or years as time goes on. And if you decided to stay in and become one of the professionals, that will take care of you as well. And I would also Biden just gave away, all this money to people under student loans. I find that hard to swallow because, I had to take out a student loan and I paid it back. Well, I think the GI Bill should be afforded to all the people that we draft. And then when they get out, they have the GI Bill to go to college. So you don't need to have this giving it away sort of process. In a sense, they would have earned that money by their 2 years of service to their nation. And to serve alongside men and women, I do think will make men and women take each other more seriously. We'll realize more the importance of not just having a romantic tryst with somebody, but having somebody at your shoulder that you can depend on, and being somebody at somebody else's shoulder that they can depend upon. The things that we don't, maybe can't teach in the schools can be taught for a relatively short time in a situation where we have a draft, we have basic training followed by some kind of advanced training if they stay in the military, which most will, or advanced training in all these other places of American life that I've already mentioned, police, firemen, med techs, and so on.
So then, is being in military or in government service a burden to be suffered, or are there any upsides to the draftees as well?
It's definitely
Maybe
a
some.
burden. It's definitely a burden to be suffered. That's why myself and everybody else tried so hard to avoid the draft, and we couldn't. We weren't going to be able to go to parties. We weren't going to be able to have our boyfriends or girlfriends. We weren't going to be able to play tennis as we used to, or it was going to change our whole life for a couple of years. And when you're 18 or 20 or 22 years old, a couple of years is 10% of your lifetime. And that's an incredible burden. You can't imagine it as anything else but a burden. But that doesn't mean when you came out, you look back at it and see it as an incredible burden. You went in seeing it as a burden. And of course, it was a bit of a burden. But then when you came out, it wasn't so much a burden. You were proud of what you were able to do. You were proud of the people you were with. You were proud of being able to do things you never imagined you could do.
And I
Any
guess that
family, any family that you create after that, they're going to have somebody in that family who knows something about how to take care of my family.
that's what I was gonna say. Like that discipline stays with you lifelong. Like you
Mm-hmm.
never forget what you learn. And then, I was fortunate enough to work for um, a supervisor that work under a supervisor that had a high rank position as a Air Force officer. I don't exactly know what the title was at the time, but I learned so much from him about the American military, about the Air Force, and I was one of those people who asked him that, hey, you served for so many years, you've been to the war, did you kill someone? And oh my God, his face turned red. He used to call me D, and he said, D, you never asked that question. I learned not to ever bring that up to any veteran. And
Mm-hmm.
then along like what that's what formed me, and I learned so much about how the veterans think, how what impacts them in which way. And that's why my dissertation included serving veterans in the academia, because I learned so much just being under that particular mentor. He was an amazing person and amazing teacher. He's somewhere, I don't know, but a very, very nice person who held a very high position. But when you talk to him or his family, because every person in his family had served the military, most of them were in Air Force. The wife was in Air Force, the daughter, the son-in-law, the son, everybody. So it was just a really nice, very loving family, and you could see how much they have given to the country without expecting anything back, which
Uh,
is, I see that
and
in
again,
almost every veteran.
and again, the phrase that they've learned, you talked about giving to the country, and
Mhm,
they have given to the country, but what they've learned is you got to take care of the guy to your left, to your right,
mhm,
in the front, in the back. They're not aware of serving their country in some kind of grand sense. That's something that a university professor talks about in front of 50 people in a classroom, or a politician perhaps. But when you're in the military, you're there to serve the people you work with. And whether you're a grunt or you're a colonel, you still have to work with other colonels and captains and majors and generals, and you have to have each other's back.
mhm. Yeah, when I did my study, most of these the participants mentioned going in, they weren't really going because they were so patriotic or they were looking forward to doing this and that. They were just going because some of them really needed the financial help. Some of them really wanted to travel the world. But being in there, completing the training, um, going and staying for 10, 15 years in the armed forces and then coming back and re, you know, enrolling and being in the reserves, it's a different feeling once they serve and they come out.
Another thing that the draft would do is that right now, for someone to consider going in and enlisting voluntarily, that's a big gamble. Will things really
Mhm,
turn out well for me? Will I come back out with this benefit or that benefit later? I mean, I'm gonna lose all my friends. I mean, let's be serious. I'm gonna be away for a couple of years. So when I come back, um, Johnny's Got Your Girl used to be a song that we sang as we marched out to the gun range. Um, that happens. But if you have a draft, everybody knows that they're going to be going through that. And it isn't such a risk because we're all doing it. We're all doing it. It's just what's expected of us. It's just what's expected of us. And while we may think about, you know, well, at least we're serving our nation or whatever, what you're really going to learn is the
mhm.
importance of serving the people immediately around you.
So, but when you say about 2 years, right? So, would a policy of 2 years service wouldn't it be costly to the country?
It's a lot more
Would it?
costly to be paying what we pay people for security in airports and what we pay buck recruits in fire departments and police forces and so on. We would be, we could so easily pay for that, given all the things where we could assign the folks to do during their, post basic training and advanced training to do, because you're doing your military work right now. So you're gonna when I was in, and I'm not saying we should go back to this, but when I was in, I think we got $92 a month, and they paid us in cash.
Mm,
$92 a month. What the heck?
wow.
The military pays. They feed you. They give you exhaustive medical care. You don't need the money except to play with. And so having low salaries for your recruits isn't going to be a problem because remember, first and foremost, they're there to serve. And um, you know, one could say when you're there to serve, it's like monks. When you're there to serve, you're not asking for any money at all. Feed me, keep me alive, give me a cot to sleep on. The monks can do that. So the people that get drafted would get a very minimal pay, whatever it might be. It's going to be more than $96 a month, I'm sure, but it will still be a lot less for the country than what we're suffering right now. And if we tag into, once you've served, you have access to the GI Bill, they're going to make a decent amount of money with that GI Bill that will also put them in a position to make even much more money afterwards. And on top of that, we're not going to have politicians playing these games where they loan money to students and then say, okay, if you vote for me, I'm going to give it all back to you.
All right. Very interesting, Dr. Wagner. I'm sure that you have many more stories. If you don't mind, how many total years you served in the army?
No, I was in the reserves, and so I was only in for the 6 months where I'm actually at a base, and then after that 5.5 years where I had to go to summer camp for 2 years. Every month we had a weekend, where we did some kind of military stuff, and
That's why you said you had the fun. You did the fun stuff.
I did the fun stuff. Yeah. I I like a lot of people. I have a lot of good memories about the military. I have, you get a certain age in life, you don't want to hang on to bad memories at all. So whatever few bad memories I might have had, they've gone the way of dead neurons, and I have good memories about the military, and most of the people that I talk to have good memories as well. We swap a lot of jokes. Good experiences.
Well, Dr. Wagner, thank you so much for sharing this information. The article that you mentioned, how can our viewer access that? Is it
Well, I mean,
something?
the Austin American Statesman is one of the biggest newspapers in the country. So I'm sure you can just go online somewhere, and it was an editorial. And so you just go Paul A. Wagner, Austin American Statesman, and it was, I don't know, a dozen years ago or so. And you should be able to, pull it up. I expected that there might be a lot of, one of the reasons I chose the Austin American Statesman for the newspaper I was going to submit the editorial to was because of the large student population there. The University of Texas at Austin is one of a handful of the largest universities in the country. And I expected a lot of good, robust criticism and debate about the issue. Much to my surprise, there was a fair amount of response, but it was all positive. And so, contrary to what I would have thought, people going, you're not going to make me go do none of that Army stuff or Navy stuff or whatever else. That wasn't what happened. It was, people agreeing with your different aspects, and I don't know how many young people wrote back editorials. I think people that wrote not editorials, but the people that wrote back letters to the editor, I think tended to be older, and so they were, naturally going to be more supportive, I suppose. But it's an important thing to do. You look at places like Luxembourg and famously Israel and the little satellite nations to Russia like Lithuania and Estonia and so on. They all have a draft, and they expect their people to serve. 2 years you give to our country, and we're going to try to give back to you for the rest of your life.
Well, sign me up. No, thank you so much, Dr. Wagner. And we'll put the link to the article in the description box
Oh,
so viewers can read the entire article. But once again, thank you so much. This is Dr. Wagner. I'm Dr. Dipal Parekh, and we just are going to see, we will continue our conversation with another topic for you guys to enjoy. Please continue to let us know what you think of these conversations, and if you would like us to explore more books that Dr. Wagner has written, or if he has if you have a specific topic that you would like Dr. Wagner to cover
there's a lot of
from
books
his
behind me.
writing. Yeah, 200 articles and more coming. So thank you so much. Namaste, sir. Thank you, as always, for the knowledge, for the wisdom, and the time that you give. Thank you, sir.
Namaste.